So guys, welcome back to Aisha.Academy, and in today's video we're doing upper and lower bounds and error intervals. So let's get right into it. It's been a while. So first of all, with bounds are basically rounded numbers that can lie between the smallest possible number, which we call our lowest bound, and the largest possible number, which we call our upper bound. Okay, and that's basically the concept of upper and lower bounds. Whereas with error intervals, they basically illustrate the upper bound, lower bound, and the rounded number in a sandwich inequality. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. So you draw it as your lower bound value, your less than or equal to sign, your x value, then your less than sign, no equal to though, and then you have your upper bound. So for example, if a question says, find the lowest, well, I'm going to try and say this in a formal way. Find the lower bound and the upper bound of this value. The width of a river is 6.4 rounded to one decimal place. So, to one decimal place basically is 0.1. So step one is basically half of 0.1 is 0.05. You're going to now subtract that from 6.4 to work out the lower bound, because that's going to tell you the lower bound. Okay, so that's step number one. So 6.4 minus 0.05 gives you 6.35, and that's your lower bound. Now to work out the upper bound, you're going to add that 0.05 onto 6.4, and by doing that you'd end up with 6.45, so we've worked out our upper bound. And that's basically that. So if we were to write the error interval for this value, you would basically write the lower bound 6.35, your less than and equal to sign, then you would write x, so always x in the middle, then you would write your less than and your 6.45. So what's better to do than practice questions? So let's get right into that. Example 1. So first off, if it says just rounds a number x to one decimal place and the result is 9.8, and it wants us to write down the error interval. So one decimal place, we're going to half that, and that's 0.05. Then we're going to take that away from 9.8 to work out our lower bounds, and that should leave you with an answer of, see if you can work it out before it comes up, 9.75. Well done if you got that right. Then the upper bound, you're going to add that 0.05 onto 9.8, and that's going to give you 9.85. And as an error interval, you're going to write the lower bound, 9.75, your less than or equal to sign, your x, your less than sign, and then you're going to write your 9.85. And that's it, literally. Another example, example 2. So in this question, it says, glass A has 122 milliliters of water to nearest milliliter. Glass B has 168 milliliters, and so on. We need to work out the upper bound of the difference. So first things first is half of 1 is 0.5. So to work out the upper bound of glass B, you're going to add that on. And to work out the lower bound of glass A, you're going to do the 122 minus 0.5. Okay, so now we've worked out the upper bound and lower bound. Because we're working that upper bound difference, that's why we worked the upper bound of B and the lower bound of A, because that's going to give you a really big difference. So difference means take away. You take away those values away from each other, and you'll be left with an answer of 47. Example 3. So in this question, it wants us to work out the upper bound and the lower bound of Dan's value of pi. So first things first is, we're going to now draw a little table of the upper bound and the lower bound, okay? So the two variables that we're looking at are circumference and diameter in this question. So we're going to end up working out the upper bound and lower bound of the circumference of the 170 and the diameter, which is 54. So first thing is, because they're rounded to the nearest milliliter, so that's 1 milliliter, right? So half of a milliliter would be 0.5 milliliters. So we're going to add, well, take away that 0.5 from the 170 to work out the lower bound of the circumference. And we are going to add that 0.5 onto the circumference value to work out the upper bound. And we're going to do similar thing for the diameter. So take away the 0.5 to work out the lower bound. And add that 0.5 to work out the upper bound. So now, because we're working out the pi, right, we're working out the lower bound and the upper bound of this value of pi. So for the lower bound of pi, you're literally going to do the lower bound of the circumference over the upper bound of the diameter, because if you have a smaller number over a bigger number, that's going to give you a lower number. But for the upper bound value of pi, you're going to do the upper bound of circumference over the lower bound of diameter, because a bigger number over a smaller number would give you a bigger number. So by working that out, so using your calculator, of course, they're not expecting you to do these things in your head. That would allow you to work out the values of pi. So therefore, the lower bound of this would be the 3.11, and the upper bound would be the 3.19.